Good afternoon, everyone. We're so delighted you could join us this afternoon. I'm Catherine Kelshaw, Chairman of the Dyslexia Association, and this webinar is carded to start at 4. We have over 500 people registered, and we've been advised that we should give them 5 minutes to be admitted to the room. So thank you for your patience. We're going to start officially at 4:05. So in the meanwhile, as I have your rapt attention, I would like to tell you a little bit about the work of the association. The association is a charitable organization. We were started 30 years ago, and our main aim has always been to train as many teachers as we can in specific methods for teaching dyslexic children and struggling readers. So we've actually trained over 1,000 teachers in Trinidad and Tobago. What this means is if parents call us and they are from Moruga or Matura or Blanchichez or even Betsy's Hope, we can hopefully find a tutor who can do a screening test and a follow-up tutoring for them. So we run 3 courses. The first course is our signature 3-week course, usually the last 3 weeks in July. It is a multi-sensory, sequential, structured phonics program. So it is intense phonics. We really break down the code for the children, teach them how English works. English is a difficult language, and these children need to be taught it every step of the way. The other program that we run, usually at Easter, is a program on phonological awareness. Now, phonological awareness is a core difficulty of dyslexia, but it is also a core reason why children who come from poor homes with poor language skills, or children who have hearing implications like maybe unattended middle ear infections, have difficulty with reading. So it's important we get in there and actually train that awareness of sound phonological awareness. So that course is called Now Foundations for Speech, Reading and Spelling. It's a long name, so we call it Now Foundations. Usually we run that at Easter, but we had to delay it because of the COVID-19 protocols and restrictions. And we've actually put it on for next August to give us a chance, and hopefully we'll be able to run it then. And then we run a 3rd program. It's for comprehension and expressive language. So oral and written comprehension and oral and written expressive language. That's called Now Mental Imagery. It's a very exciting program where we teach children who have trouble with comprehending. For some children, words go in one ear and out the other, and they're just not holding on to the information. And we teach them how to make visual images of what they're hearing and then what they're reading. So Now Mental Imagery, that's usually at Easter also, and depending on the amount of people who asked us for the course. I need to check my time. Sorry, I want to be punctual. All right. Still have some time, it looks. Let me check my phone. Google time, yes, okay. So we also run a bursary fund, which helps to pay for lessons for disadvantaged children. So all of the cases, parents have to pay some part of that fee just for buy-in. It doesn't have to be very much, whatever they can afford. The bursary fund also supports some teachings in some schools, and for children who are in homes, of course, the bursary fund will fund those completely. So, so that's something else to know. We have a very good library. It's a small library, but it's an excellent library about dyslexia and related difficulties like attention problems, math difficulties, handwriting difficulties. So we have books from very heavy tomes, big thick tomes, to just what can you do in the classroom to help your dyslexic child, or to help your child with attention, or to help the child with dyscalculia. So a really exciting library. University students come to borrow from us, so we know it's good. We also have a library of DVDs about dyslexia and related difficulties, and we have a wonderful audiobook collection. Emma will talk to you about the need for audiobooks, but it's a really good collection and open to everyone who'd like to join the association. It's only $30 to join the association a year, and in fact, if you're a student, in the education department at UWE or UTT or wherever, it's $15 to join. So do join us and make use of our facilities. Okay, so most of our work is outreach. We're just really putting parents in touch with teachers in the area and with running these courses. The two courses I talked about latterly, the Now Foundations and the Now Mental Injury, actually run by a neuropsychologist from the States. His name is Dr. Tim Conway. And there are extraordinary programs, and they can be used one-on-one, small groups, or also in classrooms. So worth joining up and taking those courses if you're interested. It's just a matter of calling us and putting your name down as interested. If you put your name down, it's not a commitment, I must say that. It just means that you will get an application form when the time comes. Right now, unfortunately, a lot of our courses are almost full because people signed up for this year and we've had to postpone it. So those people are still registered for the course. Of course, a few people will drop out because of the change of date. So it's also always worth just inquiring to see if we have any spaces in the courses. And if not, it will have to be the following year. So it's been a difficult situation with the pandemic, but I know you all appreciate that it's been difficult for everybody. I'm just checking my time again. So it's 4:07. It's time for us to start officially. So I'm going to welcome everyone who has joined us. I'm Catherine Kelshaw, Chairman of the Dyslexia Association. This webinar is completely funded by the Victor and Sally Moody Foundation. The foundation has been supporting our work over the last 2 years, and they continue to support us. We are entirely grateful for their support. In the background is Lisa Donnell and Thomas, organizing all the technical aspects of this webinar. Lisa, we're so pleased that you're here with us because we wouldn't manage without you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's wonderful to be here and to see everyone coming in. I'm a teacher like you all, so I'm listening in also while doing the background. Thank you so much. Enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa's also on our board of directors, so she's a wonderful asset to us. All right, so just before I introduce the panelists, I would like to give you some house notes. There's two buttons. There's a chat button and a Q&A button. If you're asking questions, we ask you to use the Q&A button. There's two reasons. If you ask the question in the chat, I promise you it will get lost in the chatter. So you won't get an answer. But also at the end of the webinar, we get a report of all the questions we've had from Zoom. We don't get a report on the chat. So ask a question on the chat and it will go. I'm sorry. So Q&A, please. We are not going to be asking questions during the presentation. We will stop halfway through and we will ask questions related to that part of the presentation, and then Emma will continue and we'll have another Q&A session after that. So, so you can't sort of raise your hand at too many people. Also, at the end of the webinar, you will be given a link to a survey. We're asking you please to fill it in. It's a very short survey. It won't take you more than 2 minutes, but it's going to help us plan future events. So important to us that you do take the time and fill that in. Thank you so much. So now on to our panelists. I'd like to introduce you to Hyacinth Guppy-Hickson. Hyacinth, thank you so much. Hyacinth is the Vice Chairman of the Dyslexia Association. She's been teaching dyslexics for 23 years, children and adults. And she is one of our senior lecturers of the association. She holds her master's in education from Sheffield University. So we're delighted to have her and to make use of her expertise. Hyacinth, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so excited to be part of this webinar. It's my first, so I'm really, really looking forward to all those great questions that are going to come later on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And our second panelist is Dr. Paulson Skerritt. Dr. Skerritt is a lecturer of reading education at the University of the West Indies. He's also the reading specialist managing the reading assessment at PEDIC. And PEDIC is the psychoeducational, oh, I have to read this one, Psychoeducational Diagnostic and Intervention Center at the University of the West Indies. I'd like to think that Dr. Skerritt's interest, so abiding interest really in reading, started when he did our training courses, as he then went on to do his doctorate as a reading specialist. Dr. Skerritt, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Catherine. It's really been an honor. You're quite right that taking all of the courses offered by the Dyslexia Association, Hyacinth was one of my tutors, you were. I'm not sure if Emma and I were in the same class together or if she was one of the tutors with me. I was trying to remember today. But my focus initially was on deaf education, and I said deaf people have challenges with reading, but in Trinidad and Tobago, we have some unique issues with reading, so I decided to do my doctorate in literacy studies. Good to be here.
Thank you. And Dr. Skerritt has always supported our work. And now on to our presenter, Emma Teixeira. Emma tells me she's always been teaching. She used to teach her classmates at school and the younger children. She has taught at the preschool level, the primary school level. She had her own Montessori school for 14 years. And then she took our training courses and changed gears. She became a full-time dyslexia tutor. She's been teaching dyslexics for the last 13 years. She's one of our senior lecturers. So before I put you on, Emma, and ask you to start, I would like to tell everybody that we're going to discontinue the chat during Emma's presentation. It's just too distracting. I mean, after all, you don't like children talking while you're presenting, right, in your class. But the chat actually comes across the screen while she's presenting, so we will disable it. Emma, I'm not taking up any more of your time. Thank you so much for doing this for us. Emma.
Hi, I'd just like to stick a pin. Has Andrew come on?
Goodness, I'm sorry I forgot to talk about Andrew. It's so important. He's right here on my list. Andrew Lewis, our two-time very successful Olympic champion. He has been helping us in the background, putting on the last webinar and this webinar. He's given us hours of his time. We're so grateful for you, Andrew. Sorry to forget you. He wasn't here yesterday when we did a run through, so I forgot you. Andrew's actually supposed to be in Japan, in Tokyo, you realize. So of course there's a silver lining behind every cloud. Here he is with us, helping us get through this webinar. Andrew, thank you so much. We are completely grateful to you, Andrew.
You're most very welcome, and a lovely good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are in the world. I see we have some people from different parts of the Caribbean. I am dyslexic, and as Catherine, once my teacher, would have told you all today, that yes, I am a huge supporter of the Dyslexia Association, all the different things that the Dyslexia Association does. And this is why I'm stopping in here to just say hi to all of you and to encourage you all to be patient with all the different dyslexia individuals that you will come across your path as teachers, guardians, parents, mentors, whatever role you play. To me, dyslexia is a gift. It has always been a gift. It just took me many years to realize what this challenge in my life was allowing me to do. So as you all come across all these individuals, continue to inspire them. I thank you all for not only being here today, but supporting the Dyslexic family, because yes, I call it a family. And as Catherine Kelshaw and Emma and the whole team take you all through this presentation, may you all have a blessed day and continue to root for the dyslexic world out there as we will continue to thrive as human beings. God bless.
Thank you, Andrew. And I forgot to say that Andrew runs a wonderful program called Succeed with Dyslexia. And he does programs for young dyslexics, their parents and their teachers. So Emma, here we go. Over to you. We're looking forward to this so much. And just a reminder that we're disabling the chat for people who've just come on while Emma's doing her presentation. Thank you, Emma.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. Thank you, Catherine, and the Dyslexia Association for giving me this opportunity to share this wonderful news that I have about dyslexia and all the information that I have about dyslexia. This presentation is divided into 3 sections. The first section, we will take a closer look at what is dyslexia. In section 2, I will give you some clues about how you might recognize a student with dyslexia in your class. In the last section of my presentation, I will focus on giving you techniques that you can use in your class to improve learning, not only for your students with dyslexia, but that would benefit your entire class. Everyone in your class will benefit from it. At the end of each section, I will include a summary of what we have talked about for your reference. And at the end of the presentation, you will receive an email of all the useful websites where you can download free material for use that I have used in my classroom. So let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to do is to give you a definition of dyslexia before looking at the areas of concern. So according to the International Dyslexia Association, dyslexia is a specific learning disability, but we prefer to recognize it as a difference because a person with dyslexia is quite capable of learning, just in a different way. Dyslexia is neurobiological in origin. A person with dyslexia may experience difficulties with fluent word recognition, poor spelling, poor decoding skills, and sequencing difficulties. They also have problems with reading comprehension, and because they tend to read less, may not have the same level of vocabulary or background knowledge as their peers. Okay, so now that we have a basic definition of what dyslexia is, let's take a closer look at those things. So the first thing I stated was that dyslexia is a specific learning difference. It is identified as being specific because it affects specifically the areas that work together for a person to acquire language skills. Let's take a closer look at what those language skills include. So when reading, there are a few skills that need to work efficiently together for you to read a passage. First, you would have to automatically recognize familiar words. That means that as soon as you see a word, you would pronounce it without any hesitation whatsoever. If there are words that you don't recognize automatically, you would need to decode those unfamiliar words. This is where you would take a moment to stop and link the letters and sounds, or have to break words into syllables to pronounce it. And of course, you would expect to be able to understand what you have read. If you can read a sentence or a passage, but you don't know what you've just read, all you did was decode that sentence. Reading involves understanding. Now, to use that information, you would need to be able to recall some facts or most of the pertinent facts. So to some extent, a degree of memory is incorporated. Sometimes you would be asked to answer questions based on the passage that you read. Comprehension questions are usually posed to examine your level of understanding of the passage. And of course, when you write your answers, you would be expected to use correct spelling and grammar. Sometimes you are asked to write a report or a story. So you must be capable of presenting written expression of your thoughts. All of these are language-related skills, which may be affected to varying degrees in a person with dyslexia. Dyslexia is neurobiological in origin. Doctors have been conducting research on dyslexia since the 1800s. However, it was only in 1979 that Doctors Galaberda and Kemper conducted autopsy examinations, which looked at the physical structure of brains of persons with and without dyslexia. They reported that they found anatomical differences in the language centers of the brain. With the invention of new technologies in the 1990s, CT scans and MRI scans were first conducted. Sometime later, around 1996, Dr. Guinevere Eden and her colleagues at Georgetown University conducted the first fMRI studies. This is where participants in the study were given specific reading tasks to perform while their brains were being monitored. Dr. Eden noted that the left hemisphere of the brain was very active when reading and when performing specific reading tasks. For example, one area of the brain is used for sounding out words. A second is used for automatically recognizing words by sight. And a third area is used for pronunciation and articulation. Unfortunately, a person with dyslexia only uses one part of the brain to carry out all these processes. During her research, Dr. Eden discovered some good news. She learned that if a person with dyslexia is tutored using a structured, intensive, multisensory, phonetic program, similar to the Orton-Gillingham method, their brains will automatically be rewired. Dr. Eden noted that on completion of the program, the person with dyslexia will now use the same areas to carry out language skills as the non-dyslexic person. You can view Dr. Eden's research on YouTube for more detailed information. Not only is dyslexia neurobiological in origin, but it is hereditary. It is a genetic difference. There is a 40% chance of dyslexia being passed from parent to child. A parent may be unaware that he is dyslexic. He may not have been diagnosed with dyslexia, but may have had very bad memories about his own school life. Maybe he felt frustrated when asked to read in class, or didn't understand what the teacher was teaching, or wasn't able to complete an assignment in class in the same amount of time as his classmates. He may even have been labeled as being lazy or disruptive and was asked to leave the class. In the past, teachers were not as open to learning differences as we are today. Now we have more experience and a better understanding of learning differences. Teachers are aware of students in their class who are struggling, and we know that it isn't just laziness or bad behavior. If you teach siblings with dyslexia, you may notice that they have different challenges. This is because no two people experience the same exact difficulties. It varies from person to person, even within the same bloodline. Here's an example. I know a parent who has difficulty expressing her thoughts clearly, even though she owns a very successful business. Her older child had difficulty decoding simple words, but is good at organizing her homework assignments, while her younger child has difficulty not only with reading and spelling, but also remembering new concepts. Interestingly, these challenges that your students encounter will change as they get older. Your students will develop strategies to cope with each stumbling block as they go along, especially if they are equipped with tools to handle all those language and other related challenges. Dyslexia does not discriminate. It is not a behavior or something that you can catch. It is just the gift that you were born with. And it occurs equally across the population. You will find people with dyslexia at all educational and intelligence levels. It is not affected by economic status or your ethnic group, and definitely does not discriminate by your gender. Since dyslexia is genetic, once a student is born with dyslexia, he will be that way for the rest of his life. If, for example, you were born with brown eyes, your eyes won't change color even if you get colored contact lenses. When you take out those lenses, your eyes will still be brown. So your students' language skills, especially reading and spelling, will probably continue to be challenging throughout life. Remember that the language that you use in preschool changes and becomes more and more advanced as you advance in life and into the working world. So your students' challenges will also change in keeping with their own growth. With an intensive remediation program and the correct guidance and support, your students with dyslexia can be successful adults, even if his reading is a bit slower. And of course, learning to use today's technologies like spell check or speech to text on your cell phone will make functioning on a daily basis even easier. How many people are dyslexic? According to the International Dyslexia Association, dyslexia occurs in 15 to 20% of the population. So, out of every 5 children, there is 1 child who is dyslexic. If you teach a class, if in your class you have about 25 children, therefore you would have approximately 5 children with dyslexia. What does that mean for you as the class teacher? Let's say that you are the infant 1 teacher, because formal education begins here. In week 1, in September, you get 25 new students who all start with the same reading age, let's say 5 years. You teach your class for the next academic year without any modifications for any students. So in other words, all students should be learning at the same equal rate, right? At the end of 39 weeks in July, the following year, your 5 students with dyslexia will have almost the same reading age as when they started. But their classmates, however, would have made just under 1 year improvement in their reading ages. The longer you wait to intervene and start remediation, the bigger the age gap that your students will experience. Some teachers think that with time, the students who are struggling to read will learn. This will not happen. What we know is that their peers will continue to progress, but they will remain almost the same. But I know that you are not one of those teachers because you are here attending this 2-hour webinar. So thank you for that. Okay, so we've reached the end of section 1 on what is dyslexia. Let's have a quick review of what we've covered so far. Dyslexia is a specific learning difference that affects the language areas of the brain. It makes it difficult for a person with dyslexia to process the letter-sound relationship in words, and therefore they have difficulty with reading fluently, spelling, and other language skills. Dyslexia is neurobiological difference, which means that it affects the language areas of the brain. These language areas are mostly in the left hemisphere of the brain, and there are three major areas in the brain for processing language. Your students with dyslexia basically use one area for processing all the language-related functions. But with correct intervention, their brains will be rewired and will function the same way as a person without dyslexia. Dyslexia is genetic, so it is passed down from parent to child. Some parents have not been diagnosed and so don't know that they are dyslexic. But they may have struggled in school themselves. It varies from person to person, even within the same family. There is a 40% chance of passing from parent to child. No matter your education, economic status, ethnicity, or gender, dyslexia occurs equally across the population. Once you are born with dyslexia, you will have that gift for the rest of your life. But with the right type of intervention and support, you will learn strategies to cope with your challenges. There are approximately 1 in 5 students in your class with dyslexia. Do you have any questions? Please post your questions in the Q&A section now. If you have any questions on this section, we will get to them shortly. So far, we looked at the definition of dyslexia and its origins. Now let's look at how you might be able to recognize a student with dyslexia in your classroom. First, I will look at some general traits that occur across all age groups. Then I will look at the signs in preschool students, then primary school students, and finally secondary school students. I will go into some detail about specific areas of major difficulty. At the end of this section, we will have a short Q&A on these first 2 sections. Across all age groups, you may notice that your student with dyslexia is bright, but is underachieving in a specific area. For example, on tests, he knows the material and can give the answers verbally, but didn't write those answers on his paper. He usually has particular difficulty with reading or spelling. He is a creative thinker. He may be able to draw very detailed pictures, but may not be able to write his thoughts down on paper, or may be able to come up with a very unique perspective on how to solve a problem, as he usually has very out-of-the-box thinking. He may read a word, then fail to recognize the same word on the next line in the same passage, and end up sounding out the same word several times, not even realizing that he had read it before. This further shows that he really isn't reading with understanding. For instance, the word fresh appears on this passage on several lines. Your student might not realize this and would have to sound out that word each time. It would be like a new word to him each time. He may have poor concentration for reading and writing, but not when he is being creative. He is usually the one to produce the most beautiful artwork in your class. What traits might you be able to notice in a preschool student with dyslexia? Your student might have delayed speech development as compared with other students of the same age. They just seem to take a longer time to begin to talk, or sometimes take a longer time to begin to express themselves in complete sentences. Your preschooler may have difficulty rhyming words. Rhyming is one of the earliest indicators that a student will have difficulty learning to read. This on its own does not mean that your student is dyslexic, but it does indicate that learning to read will be more of a challenge for this student. By giving this student some extra attention in this area, you will help to reduce future difficulties. Look for the student who can't retell a story or who can't relate an incident about something that happened. She just has a tough time keeping her thoughts in sequence. So when she relates an incident, it's like a jumbled story that you need to rearrange in the correct order. This is a preschooler who may have difficulty remembering the name of something familiar. She may say something like the thingy and seem at a loss for words. It's similar to the tip of the tongue feeling, where you know what you want to say, but you just can't remember the exact word you want to use. This preschooler may make errors called spoonerisms, where this is where, for example, she transposes the initial sounds of two words and might say the park instead of saying the car park. Look for the student who is smart but has trouble following multi-step instructions that other children her age can follow. She is probably the student who is creative and artistic. She can build a very imaginative structure with building blocks, or will create a painting with very mature detail for her age. If you are a primary school teacher, here are some things to look for. Your student with dyslexia would have a significant number of these issues, not just one or two. Your primary school student may have difficulty reading fluently. He will not be able to read without having to stop to decode words. She regularly confuses the orientation of letters and numbers. Very often, people think that this is a major sign of dyslexia, but actually, it is fairly common up to age 7. Watch out for a student who has problems learning letters and sounds. This is a skill that is taught in the infant department, but is not taught with as much emphasis in higher classes. Your student with dyslexia will not pick up on those subtle clues that other students will realize. The primary school student will confuse small words like where and were, or saw and was. He has difficulty when sequencing the words, the letters in words, so all the letters are present but are in jumbled order. He may also incorrectly sequence the words in a sentence and have difficulty to write a story in the correct order. He writes the same word in several incorrect ways on the same page. He decodes a word, reads it, and doesn't recognize it on the next line further down the page. He can give you the answers orally, but is unable to write the same answer in his book. As students move into secondary school, their challenges continue. Remember that this is a lifelong learning difference. Here are some things that you will notice. Even if your student has completed a remedial program, he may not be as fast at coping with print as his peers. So reading, writing, and spelling are still issues. He will have difficulty taking notes in class. Do consider encouraging another student to share notes with him after class. He still has difficulty putting his thoughts on paper, so he submits poorly organized essays and reports. In this instance, you may consider chatting with your class about a possible outline for written work before giving the assignment. Decoding unfamiliar words will still be one of his challenges, so he will continue to read slowly. Some prior discussion about the text and pointing out new words will certainly be helpful in this area. He will understand content if it is read to him, but if he is reading, he will have to read it and read it over again to understand it. As questions are more complex and require your student to make more inferences, he will have difficulty answering written questions. He will always avoid reading aloud, as this is embarrassing. If you want him to read something to the class, do give him time to rehearse. He has poor spelling. If you are dictating notes, just putting those new words on the board will be helpful. All of these issues would affect his ability to meet deadlines and hand in assignments on time, especially if he also has poor organizational skills. The following 6 areas are mentioned, but because they are so crucial, I want to spend some time explaining in more detail. The student with dyslexia will experience difficulties with fluent reading. When we talk about reading fluency, we expect students to read at a good pace so that we can make the link between what he is reading and his prior knowledge. You would expect him to read with the right intonation and expression so that he sounds as if he is speaking naturally. He also needs to read the content accurately to be able to understand what he is reading. Your student with dyslexia would have difficulty doing this because he would not automatically recognize words. For each word that he doesn't recognize, he would have to stop reading to decode that word. Because of this stop and start, reading is slow. As he is not pausing in the correct phrases and lacks expression, your student would not be able to understand what he has read. There are different types of spelling errors that your students with dyslexia would make. These are a few examples. He probably spells words the way they sound using phonetic spelling. Here, the word said has been spelt phonetically. And this is meant to be the word wire. It was also spelt phonetically. You may also notice that all the letters are present but written in an incorrect letter sequence, like a word that you have to unscramble to read it. This is the word bird. The letters are all present but scrambled. Sometimes the word doesn't even look familiar. This is what we call bizarre spelling. This is a student's attempt to write the word countries. There may also be omission errors where your student might leave out a letter or even a syllable. This word is from, and you can see that part of the blend is missing. In the word remember, an entire syllable is missing. Addition errors are those where the student adds extra letters or syllables. The most common one, in my experience, would be that magic E that seems to fix any word that you can't spell. Remember that Miss said that it was magic. So if you can't remember how to spell the word cut, just add a magic E to it and that will fix it. Additionally, you may often notice that the same word has been spelled in several different ways on the same paragraph. Decoding involves looking at a word and making the association between the graphemes and the phonemes. This sounds fairly simple as there are only 26 letters in the alphabet. There are 44 phonemes, including 24 consonant sounds and 20 vowel sounds, and numerous graphemes that produce those sounds. And there is also all of those vowel digraphs where the vowels are combined in a single sound to make a vowel sound. So for example, where OA says O as in boat, or AI says A as in rain. What about consonant digraphs, where consonants combine to make a single sound? For example, SH says sh as in ship, or TH says th as in thank, but TH says th as in them. Diphthongs, where the sound begins as one vowel and moves towards the other. Here, OI says oi as in coin, and OU says ow as in loud. Final syllables are a combination of letters that form the last syllable in a multi-syllable word. For example, where KLE says kl as in ankle, where CLE also says kl, but is used for spelling words that contain more than 2 syllables, as in bicycle, where SION says shun as in mansion, but also says jeune as in television. And then there are those irregular words that just don't play fair. For example, do, said, and of, which you just can't sound out even when you know all of the phonemes. Some children are fortunate to be able to pick up decoding skills easily, but that's not our students with dyslexia. Learning the graphemes and phoneme correspondence is one of the biggest challenges. They will require an intensive, structured, multi-sensory phonetic program, similar to the Orton-Gillingham program, to conquer decoding. Sequencing is important to so many different aspects of reading, language, and being able to complete tasks efficiently. If you do not arrange the letters in a word in the exact sequence, you won't spell that word correctly. For example, writing this for, he is wearing a vest. Not only letters and words, but words in a sentence must be in the correct order to convey meaning. For example, writing this: put on your socks and shoes. Imagine writing a story where the beginning, middle, and end are not in correct sequence. You would have a very difficult time following the sequence of the events in the story and understanding what the story is about. These type of sequencing difficulties are not restricted to just written expression, but may also occur in verbal expression by a student with dyslexia. If your student is having trouble with sequencing, she may also find it difficult to follow multi-step instructions, as this also involves sequencing. Students with dyslexia also have difficulty remembering some common sequences, like the days of the week, the months of the year, skip counting in 2s, 5s, and 10s. And this will also affect their ability to learn times tables. This can be an absolute nightmare for them. When reading, it is expected that at the end of the passage, you would have some understanding of what you have read. It is not uncommon for a student with dyslexia to have no idea what one sentence is about, far less for an entire paragraph. He does not understand the text after reading it because of slow reading speed. Another reason that he wouldn't understand a text is because he does not read words automatically. He has to stop to decode them. Also contributing to poor comprehension would be your student's inability to relate the text to his own prior knowledge. If he cannot understand what he has read, obviously he wouldn't be able to relate to it. He would be unable to answer the higher order thinking questions, as he wouldn't be able to use his previous experience to give a reasonable answer to the questions. On the other hand, if you read the passage to him and ask him the same questions verbally, your student with dyslexia would probably give you a very sensible answer. This is so because he would be able to relate to the information and form proper conclusions drawing on his own experience. Many students with dyslexia do not have an extensive vocabulary. One contributor to poor vocabulary is when your student does not come from a language-rich environment. This would be the type of situation where there isn't much conversation between parent and child in the home environment, where the parent tends to give instructions for the child to follow, but doesn't really engage in sharing their thoughts and ideas. For example, about sharing their thoughts on current events, maybe about the coronavirus or the upcoming elections. Another possible contributor is not being exposed to many books in their formative years. A study in Science Daily reported on the million-word gap. Jessica Logan of Ohio State University, lead author of the study, reported that if a parent or caregiver read only one book a day to their child, that child will hear about 290,000 more words by age 5 than those who are not read to daily. 290,000. Reduced vocabulary knowledge may also affect pronunciation of unfamiliar words where you are trying to read. There are many words when the pronunciation varies from when you're trying to sound out the word. For example, favorite is pronounced favorite. Or if you add a suffix to prefer, you no longer say prefer, you say preference. And lack of knowledge of vocabulary will also be evident in written expression, as your student won't be able to put his thoughts on paper at grade level. He will use smaller words that he is more familiar writing and spelling and can remember the spelling. Your student will most likely misinterpret the meaning of written and even verbal communication because of reduced grade level vocabulary knowledge. Now let's have a review of the most obvious signs that might suggest that a student in your class is dyslexic. Students with dyslexia usually have poor automatic word recognition, inaccurate spelling, slow decoding when reading, difficulty remembering sequences in words, sentences, putting thoughts in logical sequence, following multi-step directions, have poor reading comprehension, have vocabulary that is below the level of their peers, especially when coming from an environment that is not a language-rich environment, has difficulty rhyming, so will not recognize word families when reading, has difficulty with grapheme-phoneme correspondence, which makes decoding words difficult, and is slow and inaccurate at reading. I've spent quite a lot of time pointing out the weaknesses of a student with dyslexia, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any strengths. They are usually good at problem solving. They have a way of looking at a problem from a completely different perspective, which others don't think about. This allows them to find unique solutions. They are big picture thinkers. So while I might come at a problem from the point of solving the small issue that I'm presented with, they look at the big picture. This will allow for a more integrated approach to problem solving. They are very good at remembering facts, especially if they have actually experienced a situation. They are creative and imaginative. They are the students who produce the most detailed art from as early as preschool department. They are very good at reasoning out things. This ties into their big picture thinking. They are good at visual spatial skills. So if you want to rearrange the furniture in your class to maximize the best use of space, ask a student with dyslexia to come up with a solution. He can turn that around in his mind and visualize it with his 3D thinking. They are very successful in many different jobs. Here are some of the few people who are very successful with dyslexia. And they excel in areas like sports, performing arts, business, music. There's even an author. And they also excel in things like art, computer science, design, electronics, math, mechanics, physics, and sales. according to Reality Blurred on the TV show Shark Tank, 3 of the sharks are dyslexic. And more than 35% of all entrepreneurs are dyslexic because of their out-of-the-box thinking and problem-solving skills. In his interview with Reality Blurred magazine, Damon John said that he wasn't diagnosed until later in life. He said, but everyone was always saying, what's wrong with your spelling? But he adapted to his challenges. And he said, dyslexia forces you to solve problems in different ways. So you use more of your brain, including your capacity for visualization, he told the magazine. In Trinidad, we also have our own 2-time Olympian, Andrew Lewis, who you met a little while ago, who competed in the 2012 and 2016 Olympics in sailing. And this is Anya Atching, who I had the pleasure of teaching. She is a photographer, an artist, a sculptor. She is currently in Form 6, and she credits her success to being wired differently. This is a wood burning from one of another teacher's students. He is 11 years old. So at this point, we're going to stop for a short while and answer any questions that you have posted in the Q&A. But don't leave, because when we come back, I will give you some really easy tips that you can implement in your classrooms that are going to make a huge difference. So I'm going to pass you over to Catherine.
Thank you, Emma. Lovely, lovely presentation. We have loads of questions. So I'm actually going to put my timer on for 8 minutes. We're allowing 10 minutes for this. So at least now I'll be able to know when to stop. So let me just get that done. So the first question actually to you, Dr. Scarrett, is what is the earliest age that dyslexia can be diagnosed? And there was another question much the same. At what age does it manifest itself? Does it affect toddlers? It's all in the same vein. Thank you.
Well, I know people have been wondering about genetic testing, because the problem is that by the time we tend to identify a child with dyslexia by the end of maybe standard 1 or just before, a lot of time for developing language and addressing those language issues have been lost. There are some screening, for example, at PEDIC, there's some screening instruments we might use to try and determine if a child is at high risk, and we can do that maybe by age 4 or 5, by 5 years old. A lot of the tests for dyslexia are psychometric assessments, and generally we would administer those on a child that is 5, 6 years old. Genetic testing, parents are willing to accept that early identification of possible a child being at risk for dyslexia, but we tend to work with children around the age 5, 6, because they have to have been given a chance to develop their reading skills, to have language developed. Then you can know for sure that something's amiss. Catherine, you're muted.
So sorry, I was muted. So many things to think about. Very interesting, Dr. Scarrett. Someone else asked a question about genetic testing. So, so that is a possibility, is it?
I'm not sure what the latest on that is, so I'm not going to comment. I've read in the past about announcements that there might be a genetic test, but I'm not certain what is the current status of that. So we can respond to that at a later time.
Yes, wonderful information. And Hyacinth, because of this question that I've just posed to Dr. Scarrett, maybe you could say a little bit about our early screening at the Dyslexia Association, Hyacinth. Hyacinth, you're still muted, sorry.
Sorry, guess the space bar didn't work. Yes, so at the Dyslexia Association, we do a screening test for as early as 5 years old, where we look at, so the test doesn't tell you if the child is dyslexic, but it looks at areas where the child is falling short. So we might look at sequencing skills, memory skills, visual skills, reading, spelling, following instructions, recall of memory, or those type of areas. And if we see there's a deficit in the area, then we say to you, you know, yes, this is not a test telling you that that your child is dyslexic or your student is dyslexic, but listen, there are deficits here. Let's jump in and get remediation started. So we have a number of trained teachers at the association that you can refer your parents to, and that you just have to call the association and we do that for you.
Thank you very much, Hyacinth. So Dr. Skerritt, I have another question for you. Are all cases of dyslexia genetic, or are there other causes?
No, so it's definitely not, it's not 100% genetic, maybe around 70%. If it were 100% identical, twins would be both dyslexic, and that's not always the case. There are other factors, and I think Emma alluded to some of them earlier. So the environmental factors, the lack of early exposure to print, the language factors in the home. So there are other, and that's why, for example, if you wanted to have a genetic test, it may not necessarily give, you know, be an accurate indicator of someone being dyslexic or not.
Yes, I'm reading in the literature about a sort of environmental dyslexia where, as Emma said, children who are not exposed to print don't develop good phonological awareness, which is actually the same core difficulty that dyslexics experience. So it looks like dyslexia, but these children don't have the other accompanying problems that dyslexics have. So yes, it's a wide problem. Hyacinth, this one is for you. Is it possible that dyslexia can appear in adulthood, maybe not get diagnosed in childhood, or can it be a result of an injury?
Yes, it could. You see, many times, if you get good support as a child, your parents have supported you, they sit with you, you do homework with you, they send you for lessons, and you get all that support. You can get to adulthood and now realize that now that you're on your own and you have to be able to perform in class on your own without that extra support at home, you're expected to be a more independent thinker and be able to do your work on your own. The dyslexia can show up at a later time. Was there another part to the question, Catherine? I can't
Yes,
remember.
there was, and if you'd like, I can put it to Dr. Skerritt. It was talked about dyslexia as a result of injury.
Okay.
Dr. Skerritt?
Well, I guess because dyslexia is a neurological development, if a person has injury that affects that part of the brain, then certainly it could resolve. So the answer would be yes.
Catherine, if I could jump in again, I was thinking of those people who say had a stroke and part of the brain was affected. Yes, because of that injury, then it appears like dyslexia, and we use a similar type program to help them be able to read again, especially if they've lost the language part of their brain.
Thank you for that, because it's quite an amazing program that even people who've had stroke can, the part of the brain that's damaged won't work, but the area around can then be, because of good intensive training, can then start taking on the skills that have been lost. So very exciting. I don't think I have just one more minute. Someone wanted to know, Hyacinth, what is the cost for a teacher to register?
Well, if you would like to register right now, like Catherine said at the beginning, you just call and call the Dyslexia Association and give them your name and number. It's not an obligation to take in the course. It just means that you're interested. So there's no registration fee. You just call and put down your name. That's it.
Very much. Last question for you, Hyacinth. It's actually, shall we correct students with dyslexia's writing all the time when spelling and grammatical mistakes are made in that red pen? How do you suggest we correct their works without doing that?
Okay, so the red pen really sends a very negative message, I think, because we've all have had such bad experiences at school with teachers using these red pens and just Xing out our work. But I think it's more helpful if you sit with the child and be able to talk them through, well, do you remember what's the sound for sh? How do we spell that sh sound? And if you can walk them through it, what was the rule again for using C, okay, at the beginning of a word? That type of information gives your child a better chance at getting it right later on, rather than we Xing out or, you know, letting them know that, go try again. That's not helpful. We could teach them, and Emma will come into this in her next part of the presentation, how to teach your child how to spell and for it to go into long-term memory, because that's a lot of times it's a problem of getting those words into long-term memory for these children.
So thank you. Actually, we have a teacher from the Bahamas who did our training course, and she talked about, actually with tears in her eyes, about walking into the class and the teacher saying, "Your essay is bleeding again." And it was so distressing for her. So yes, that red pen can be very distressing. Okay, so thank you to our panelists. We'll now go back to our presentation. Emma, you ready for us?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Just pulling up my slides. Okay, so this is where we left off. Moving on. So now hopefully you know lots more about dyslexia and how to recognize it in your classroom. I'm going to spend the rest of the time giving you some helpful tips on what you can do to make sure that every child in your class is given an equal opportunity to succeed. I'm not talking about giving them an unfair advantage, but instead you will be leveling the playing field. So you can be the teacher who has more success reaching the 1 in 5 students who are experiencing language difficulties. In this section, I'm going to focus on the 4 major skills that are needed for fluent reading. The first area will be phonics. Teaching phonics allows your students to link the symbols or the graphemes to the sounds, which are called phonemes, to read words. It is an important component in learning to read. So students need excellent phonemic awareness skills. That is, to be able to hear and manipulate the phonemes in words. The second area will be spelling. To be able to write sentences, students must spell accurately. So again, being able to hear the phonemes and link them to the correct graphemes is crucial. The third area is fluency. Students need to automatically recognize sight words, which are high frequency words, and to quickly decode unfamiliar words. This must be done without hesitation in order to comprehend what you read. The fourth area will be comprehension. Your students must be able to read and answer questions sensibly based on the information provided in the text. What's the difference between phonics and phonemic awareness? When you think about phonics, you are looking at what letters you use to represent the sounds in a word. So the letters that you use to represent the sound. Like in the word bead, the graphemes which represent the E sound are EA. But in the word teeth, the grapheme representing the E sound are double E. A simple explanation is that phonics deals with the relationship between the graphemes and the phonemes. This is something which needs to be taught to your students with dyslexia using a phonics program. You can refer your students to the Dyslexia Association to find a trained teacher in the phonics program. On the other hand, phonemic awareness deals with manipulation of the individual sounds in words. So because we're dealing with sounds, I'm not going to use letters, I'm going to use colors. Going back to the word bead, there are 3 phonemes in the word bead. B, E, D. So I'm not using letters because it's phonemic awareness, the awareness of the sounds in the word. If I ask you to remove the last sound in bead, you would say B, because this says B, E, B. And if I ask you to add the sound T to the end, you would say B, E, T, beat. Again, we are working on sounds, not the number of letters. Both phonics and phonemic awareness are important foundation skills for reading and for learning to read and spell. So just to reiterate, phonics is about the relationship between the graphemes and the phonemes, while phonemic awareness is about manipulating each phoneme or sound in a word. So what you can really reinforce are phonemic awareness skills. So let's go straight into that. Rhyming is one of the earliest signals that indicates that a student will have difficulty acquiring reading skills. So according to Kids Sense Child Development Australia, around age 4 to 5 years, students should be able to begin to rhyme words. Preschool teachers can read nursery rhymes and pick out rhyming words. This should be where you start introducing rhyming. For example, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Oh, those words rhyme. Wall, fall. Let's think of some words that have the same ending sounds. I'll give you some clues. Let's go to long circular. Mall. I want to buy a, you bounce it, a ball. Then I will use my phone to call my friend. So now that you see if you can remember some of the rhyming words. Wall, fall, mall, ball, call. At preschool level, once your students have gotten the hang of rhyming words, you can then try a worksheet. The worksheet would use rhyming words that you've already done previously. Here, your student would have to circle the pictures that rhyme with fall. So they would circle wall, mall, ball, call. Another activity that can be done at any grade level would be to read a story. Say the wrong word, ask your students to say the correct word. But the catch is, the word must be a rhyming word. You can use any storybook that you have in your class. No need to make up anything special. So here's an example. Once upon a time, there was a hog. Your student would say, no frog. He lived in a pond. They said, no pond. The frog was big and crown. No, he was brown. The big brown frog sat on a fog. No, he sat on a log in the pond. Another important phonemic awareness skill is to be able to omit a sound in a word. According to KidSense Phonological Development Achievement Chart, students should be able to delete a sound in a word by age 6 to 7 years. 6 to 7 years. Here are some exercises that you can do to train these skills. For these exercises, you don't actually need any material. It's just a list of words. So you want to omit the beginning. Ask your students to say send. Now say it without the s. Or say cat. Now say it without the k. Omit the ending. Ask your students to say cart. Now say it without the t. Say mend. Say it without the d. Now, once they can do that, they can omit the second sound. Ask your students to say spent. Now say spent without the p. Or say snap. Now say it without the n. You can then move on to omitting the second to last sound. Please say past. Now say it without the s. Or say camp without the m. As you realize, this is completely oral. This is the type of activity that can be used to get your class to stop what they are doing and to focus on you. I know that your curriculum is already full, but these types of activities will make a big difference. So when you are waiting for the bell to ring to send your class out, or lining up to go to the library or to go to another activity, this is when you can do these types of activities. That's when you can use all of these oral activities. It's a fun way to get their attention and to get everyone engaged. Another fun way to include some more phonemic awareness activities into your class is to ask your students to blend sounds into words. Here, you would say the sounds of the word, and your student has to say the word. So at preschool level, you would use the CVC pattern. So consonant, vowel, consonant pattern. So you can say something like, show me the k, a, t, and they would say cat. In the infant one, you would use again the CVC pattern, because not all students would have experienced the same degree of phonemic awareness exposure in preschool. So you can say something like, touch your n, o, z. In infant 2, you could include words which contain blends like your CVC pattern. So say something like, rub your s, k, e, n. And you can also use the CVCC pattern. So you would say, show me your right h, a, n, d. From standard 1 onwards, you could ask your students to blend syllables. So you can say, take out your com, pre, hen, shun textbook, or take out your ma, the, ma, text book. According to KidSense development chart, students should be able to begin to learn how to count syllables around age 5. From as early as preschool, you can show your students an object and ask him to name it and clap out the syllables. Here you are not asking him to count the syllables, just to understand that every syllable has one beat. So practice clapping each child's name, name various objects in the class, clap out the beat. In the infant 1, you can now move to using pictures. Your students' reading books should have a lot of pictures, so you don't have to look very far. I'm sure your class is also full of colorful charts. Use these pictures to clap out syllables. Again, you do not have to count the syllables, but just to bring the awareness that every syllable is one beat. By infant 2, you would want to start counting the syllables in words. So you can show 3 different methods for counting syllables. Show your students how to count the syllables by clapping them out. So for example, how many syllables are there in the word pineapple? Pine-a-pull. There are 3 syllables. Show your students how to count the syllables by counting the number of times your chin drops. So how many syllables are in the word table? If you look at my chin, table, it dropped 2 times. So there are 2 syllables. Show your students how to count the syllables by tapping across the table. So seeing that you can't see my table, I'm going to use my arm as a table. So how many syllables are in the word computer? Com-pu-ter. There are 3 syllables. So here I counted the 3 syllables, but I also visually saw the syllables laid out on the table as I tapped. Com-pu-ter, which shows me how words are written. Your older students may still experience difficulty reading and spelling, especially longer words. Learning how to manipulate syllables can be quite useful. Multi-syllable words are usually spelled the easiest way you know. This is why you want to work at a multi-syllable level. If you don't teach it, they won't know it. Again, this phonemic awareness activity can be done at an oral level. The only thing you need is a list of multi-syllable words. How many syllables are in the word remember? Remember. That's 3. Now, say remember without the re. Remember. How many syllables are in the word peppermint? Peppermint. 3. Now say the word without the mint. Pepper. In higher classes, you can also work at a prefix and suffix level. Working at an oral level first can encourage students to use prefixes and suffixes in written work, as the words will become more familiar. Here are a few examples. First, you can try to omit a prefix. Say illogical without the prefix. Logical. Say incomplete without the prefix. Complete. You can also add a prefix. Add the prefix im to possible. You get impossible. Add the prefix dis to advantage. You get disadvantage. And of course, you can also include the vocabulary meanings. Next, you could omit a suffix. Say preventable without the suffix. Prevent. Say seasonal without the suffix. Season. You can also add a suffix. Add the suffix full to great. Grateful. Add the suffix ic to hero. Heroic. If you remember from section 1, Dr. Guinevere Eden found that the brain of a person with dyslexia could be rewired through a structured phonics program. She suggested that on completion of a structured, intensive, multisensory phonetic program, your students with dyslexia will learn those letters and sounds necessary for reading and spelling. The program should incorporate reading, spelling, and handwriting, which should be taught together. The focus of this type of program targets the exact problem that plagues a student with dyslexia. You could refer your students who are experiencing difficulty to the Dyslexia Association to get a teacher who has been trained in a multisensory phonics program. The earlier that a student is referred for intervention, the easier it will be for him to close the reading age gap between your student and his peers. Remember that the reading age gap continues to increase with each year that passes. From preschool onwards, repetition is necessary for retention. This is especially true for those 44 phonemes in the English language. Using the Jolly Phonics cards to practice the sounds in class. The Jolly Phonics has the recordings of the letter sounds free for download. Just do a Google search for Jolly Phonics, hear all the letter sounds. Also encourage your students to revise their books with the letters and sounds at home. Now that you have lots of tools to help your students with phonemic awareness, and you can refer your students who need help in phonics, let's talk about spelling. Students with dyslexia have a difficult time memorizing spelling. They do not automatically see the patterns in words. They don't see the part of the word that doesn't play fair. Do point out these to your students when you are giving them the new spelling words. So as you write the spelling words on the board, highlight the part of the word that doesn't play fair, and ask your students to do the same in their book. Let's take a look at a few examples. If you sound out the word said, the S and the D make their correct sounds, S and D. But the AI usually says A as in rain, but here it says E. So you will highlight the AI because it doesn't play fair. If you sound out the word busy, the letters B, S, and Y make their correct sounds. Yes, S sometimes makes the sound Z, as in pins and nose. But U doesn't usually say eh. U either says as in umbrella or U as in uniform. So highlight the U as it doesn't play fair. If you sound out the word laugh, L, A, F, you get 3 sounds. The only letter that actually makes its own sound is the L. AU in this word says ah, but AU usually says or as in sauce. And GH in this word says f. In most words, GH says g as in ghost. This word has 2 parts that don't play fair. That's why I use 2 different colors. So point out the part of the word that doesn't play fair to your students. Most of your class will get it automatically, but those 5 students will really need you to show it to them. Your students with dyslexia will not notice the similarity in words, like in word families. Do point this out to them. The other students will automatically realize this once you give them 1 or 2 words from that word family. They will automatically be able to read and spell these words, but not your students with dyslexia. Give words containing the same endings. For example, care, dare, fair, rare, square, instead of a series of unrelated words. Teach your students with dyslexia how to learn spelling, as the method of rote learning won't get very good results. When they learn by rote, the word pattern doesn't get transferred from their mouth to their hands. So they can sometimes spell the word by rote, but then they write something completely different. It's just not in their hands. Use the method read, spell, cover, write, check. Read the word course. Spell the word COURSE. Cover the word. Write the word C-O-U-R-S-E. Check your spelling. C-O-U-R-S-E. Most students will learn the spelling words you give by rote learning, but this only engages the auditory method of learning. Rote learning may allow your student to recite the spelling, but it does not guarantee that they will write what he says. For students with dyslexia, a multisensory approach is preferred. So methods of memorization which engage more of their senses will have more long-term benefits. Encourage your students to use a tactile surface when learning spelling at home. A tactile surface adds sensory feedback, which will further reinforce memorization. Try writing the words on a chalkboard. Then tracing it with your finger as you spell the word a second time. Try using a textured material below, like a textured placemat, and then putting a piece of fabric or piece of paper on top of it to add the sensory feedback as you write. Don't use a ballpoint pen as it glides across the page and doesn't give sensory feedback. Don't use a whiteboard, it doesn't give sensory feedback. Remember that you want them to get the spelling words into their hands, not only in their minds. Have you ever used mnemonics to memorize notes yourself? Have you ever thought about showing your students how to use mnemonic devices to aid in memorization of spelling? Using mnemonics is another tool which can be used to reinforce those particularly difficult words. This is a method that you would need to teach your students. Your students will enjoy coming up with the silly phrases too. Do remember to draw a picture when possible. Here is the dreaded word said, and a mnemonic for it, Sam and I dance, and a picture. What about the word because? Here's the mnemonic. Big elephants can always understand small elephants. There are several websites where you can find more like these, but I think you and your students can come up with your own. When learning multi-syllable words, it is best to break those into syllables first. This will allow your student to work at memorizing smaller groups of letters. Grouping the spelling in syllables also allows for spelling and writing the word using a rhythm. And this can improve memorization. So first you would say the word afternoon. Get a chalkboard, then draw a line for each syllable. Afternoon. Check your spelling. Write each syllable on the line. A-F-T-E-R-N-O-O-N. Check your spelling before you write the whole word. Cover the word. Now write the whole word using your rhythm. A-F-T-E-R-N-O-O-N. Check your spelling. For many students with dyslexia, the thought of writing in cursive is absolutely daunting. And there has been a withdrawal from writing in cursive, as many find it difficult. But in my experience, writing in cursive can be a very useful skill for a few reasons. When writing in print, each letter has a different starting point. For instance, if you are writing the word spent, the letter S begins with a curve and comes back. The letter P starts at the top and goes down. The letter E starts in the middle and goes across and then circles around. Both the letter N and T start at the top and come down, but they don't start at the same place. If you write the same letters in cursive, however, each letter starts on the baseline and ends on the baseline. When you write the whole word spent, there's only one starting point and one ending point. I usually get less questions from my students about, Miss, where does this letter start again? This is because all letters begin at the same baseline and there isn't any start and stop within a word. Cursive writing allows for memorization of the word pattern, as thoughts are not disjointed. This reduces the number of spelling mistakes that would usually be made by your student. When writing in cursive, it also increases the writing speed once handwriting has been mastered. When you give students spelling words to learn, you want them to be able to not only write those words, but you want them to use them correctly in written expression. I know this sounds self-explanatory, but this is not obvious to all of your students. For those students who struggle with language, you need to be a bit more explicit. Spelling words should never be learned in isolation. They should be learned with vocabulary and used in a sentence. By getting your students to use the word in a sentence, you are prepping them for writing sentences. Learning the vocabulary can improve the use of the word in the correct context. This is especially necessary for learning the spelling of homophones. Now that your students can manipulate the sounds of phoneme or phonemes in words and can write spelling words correctly in written expression, let's explore fluency. We already know to read fluently, you must read at a good pace so that you make sense and you make the links between what you're reading and your prior knowledge. You need to read with the right intonation or expression so that you sound as though you were speaking naturally. You need to read automatically, to decode unfamiliar words quickly without hesitation. Read the content accurately to be able to understand what he is reading. So let's find out ways to improve these skills. In 1936, Edward William Dolch published the Dolch word list. It is a list of 220 frequently used English words, but it does not contain any nouns. This list has never been revised or updated. In 1950s, Dr. Edward Fry developed the Fry's list. It was updated in 1980 and is therefore a more relevant list of high frequency words. Fry's list contains the 1,000 most common words to appear in reading material used in grades 3 to 9. The most interesting thing about this word list is that if your students can automatically read the words on the prize list, they will be able to read, wait for it, 50 to 65% of all written material. That's according to vocabulary Spellcity. Prize list is sorted into groups of 100 most frequently used words. So it can easily be included into your spelling words that you would give your class on a weekly basis. You could cover 100 words in just 10 weeks. That's less than one term. And you would still be able to give all the other spelling words that your students would need for their assignments. And imagine if your school undertakes to include this list from infants department to standard 5. Imagine the difference that you would make in your school. For your students, mastering decoding skills will bring them closer to be able to read fluently. Using the Jolly Phonics material that already exists in the school to teach the letters and sounds, continue using it until all the graphemes have been taught. Repetition is the key to mastery of phonics so that it becomes automatic. Your students will need to revise their cards daily. Always shuffle the cards so your students won't memorize the pattern. I had a student who revised his cards every day. He could go through them so fast. I was always surprised. But he couldn't. He continued to have difficulty reading even simple words that were made up of just those cards. I couldn't understand why. Why was he having so much difficulty to read what I had taught him? I took his cards from him one day and I mixed them up. He shouted, "No, don't move the cards from in the order that they were in." Then I realized that he kept his cards in the same order all the time. He had memorized them by rote and didn't actually know each individual card. Think of phonics as scales. Like a concert pianist, he always practices his scales before performing. So practice phonics cards before reading. Reinforce new phonics lessons taught by reading and writing words that contain those letters. Use the Star Spell word bank, which contains a list of words that you can make for each new letter taught. For example, in week 1 in infants, you would teach SATPI. Here are some words that you can teach your children to read using just those letters. So there are actually 14 words that you can make with just those 5 letters. So at the end of the first week, your children can read 14 words. You can now make sentences for them to read. These sentences were all made using only those 14 words. So I'm only using what I've taught. Once you teach a new letter, immediately use it in decodable words and decodable sentences. Follow up this by giving your students decodable books. There are currently 199 free, downloadable, printable phonics books from the Spelled website, S-P-E-L-D, which can be easily downloaded and shared with your students. And those phonics books are written using the Jolly Phonics pattern. Frequency means that your student can automatically read sight words. Get your students to make flashcards for the sight words. Use the words from the Fry's word list and from your spelling words. Then shuffle the cards and read them regularly so they can commit them to memory through repetition. You could also have a larger version of the flashcards, which you can use in your class. You can get one student to hold up the card for the rest of the class to read while you are writing notes on the board, for example, or correcting books. Play sight word board games. There is a website called Sight Words where you can either use their pre-made word lists, which includes the Fry's word list, or you can use your own custom word list to generate board games for your students. Print and laminate board games, and you will have them available for many years to come. Some of the board games available on this website are Bingo, Fly Swat, Go Fish, Snakes and Ladders, Fishing, and Memory. And they're all free to download and print and are fully customizable. Before we talk about what to do to minimize visual tracking, let's find out what visual tracking is about. Visual tracking is used daily for several activities. But when you're reading, your eyes need to track the words from left to right and then down the page. According to the OT toolbox, signs of visual tracking problems include: you lose your place when reading, skips lines or words often when reading and copying and handwriting, moves head excessively when reading. If your student has difficulty keeping track of where he is on the page while reading, there are a few things that you can do. Show your students how to use these tools so their eyes can easily track across the page. Run your finger below the words across the page. Use a smooth, continuous movement. Do not lift your finger and point to each word, as this will encourage your student to read in a start-stop manner. For younger students, using your finger might be fine, but for older students, this will seem immature. Instead, your older students can use the back of a pen to glide seamlessly across the page while reading. Another tool your students can use, and probably already have in their school bags, is one of those colored plastic rulers. Place the ruler either below the text you want to read or on top of the text. Some children find it easier to read black ink through a colored strip instead of reading black ink on white paper. This allows for faster moving down the page. There's also a colored plastic reading guide that has a cutout strip in this middle section of it. This is one you would have to buy. It works by focusing your eyes within the open space as you read. When you read a story or a passage, you want to understand what you have read. Otherwise, there's no point in reading it. Reading with understanding means that when you read, you're able to link the content of the passage to your own knowledge. In this way, you are able to see the story or the passage from your perspective. A good reader uses his imagination to create mental movies of what he is reading. He will see it in such detail that his mental movie is much better than the actual movie. Have you ever been told by an avid reader that they were disappointed in the movie version of a book that they had read? That's because their mental movie was probably far more detailed. This is what you need to convey to your students. You must teach them how to use their imaginations to create mental pictures and movies when reading. The Dyslexia Association runs a training course for teachers in this method. You can always call to get more information about courses. Why should you read to your class? The first reason is that reading to your class allows your students to be exposed to content that is above their reading level. So they may not be able to read the text, but that does not mean that they can't understand it. Dyslexia generally affects reading, but it does not affect intelligence. So you can expose your class to age-appropriate content. A second reason to read to your class is that you can model reading. This can be especially helpful if your students can follow along in their own books. Your students can notice where you place emphasis on words, pronunciation of unfamiliar words, how to handle different pronunciation marks, and the expression that you use while reading. Later, when your students read the same passage on their own, they will remember how to approach it because of your explicit guidance. Another reason to read to your class is that your struggling readers will be able to gain the knowledge that their non-struggling classmates are able to read on their own. So you are actually leveling the playing field for success for your entire class. There may be days when you are unable to read to your class, maybe because you have to write a note on the board or you have books to correct. On these days, you can take advantage of the audiobooks, which are available from the Dyslexia Association. So audiobooks are a way for your students to be able to gain vocabulary, new words, expressive language, pronunciation, knowledge that they could gain at age-appropriate levels. As a member of the Dyslexia Association, you can borrow these books. You call the Dyslexia Association for more information about membership and encourage your students to join also. What makes comprehension so difficult? Is it not being able to read all the words? Or is it that you don't know the meaning of some of the words? What about if you can read all the words and you know all of the meanings of the words? What then? According to Rick Lavoie, on a presentation he did on YouTube called "How Difficult Can This Be?" the Fat City Workshop, Mr. Lavoie shows participants a list of words. These were all educated people who were sitting in the room: teachers, social workers, parents. They could all read the words and they all knew the meanings. He showed them and he read a passage which contained only those words. Guess what? Out of the room of all of those people attending the workshop, only one man understood the passage. You see, comprehension has more to do with your background knowledge than vocabulary. That man understood the passage because of his background. So what's the best method of doing a comprehension exercise? The steps to follow to complete a comprehension passage, as outlined by Southeastern University in The Key to Comprehension, are as follows. Before you start reading the passage, you want to figure out what the passage is going to be about. This focuses your attention on your prior knowledge. In this way, you can draw references and compare the passage to what you already know. So start by reading the title of the passage. What do I know about that? If there isn't a title, read the first sentence of each paragraph. This will tell you what each paragraph is about. Take a moment to try to recall your prior knowledge on the topic. Now your thoughts are centered on the topic that you're about to read. Read the questions before you read the text. This will cue you into the type of information to look for while reading. And while reading, you might spot some answers. While you read the passage, use your imagination to make those pictures in your mind. Remember that a good reader has a very vivid imagination, so his movie is usually quite detailed. This will help you understand what the text is about. Read the questions again. Circle the question word. You need to make sure that you are answering the correct question. Who as compared to what or when will produce different answers. Underline the main idea in the question. What are they really asking you? If the question is for information that is direct from the passage, underline your answer in the passage. If the question is a higher order thinking question, you have to look for a clue in the passage. When the clue from the passage, use the clue from the passage and link it to your prior knowledge to come up with an appropriate answer to the higher order thinking questions. Excuse me. Write down your answer in your book. How do you check your answer? You read over the question, focusing on the question words that you circled and the main idea that you underlined. Then compare it to your answer. Have you answered the question that was asked? Have you used correct grammar and spelling? When you don't have any prior knowledge about a new topic, try giving your students information by maybe watching a video on it. It is important to have background knowledge to be able to answer questions sensibly. In this section, we talked about the 4 major skills that are needed for fluent reading. Those were phonics, which deals with the grapheme-phoneme relationship or correspondence. And we noted that if a student has difficulty in this area, you can refer them to the Dyslexia Association to find a remedial teacher. Phonemic awareness, the ability to hear and manipulate phonemes in words. I gave you lots of examples of how you can remediate that in class at an oral level. Spelling, getting spelling in the hand, not only rote learning. Various methods of assisting students to learn spelling were given. Giving high frequency words for spelling, as they make up between 50 to 65% of text from grades 3 to 9. Fluency, which included memorizing sight words, using board games for memorization, using the Jolly Phonics, and support materials that already exist in your school, using decodable words and sentences based on the Jolly Phonics material, modeling reading, and listening to audiobooks. Using tools to assist with visual tracking, like using your finger or the back of a pen or the plastic ruler. Learning how to visualize when reading and contacting the Dyslexia Association for teacher training in this area, also for a remedial teacher. Steps for completing a reading comprehension passage. So read the title, recall your prior knowledge, read questions, read the passage, read the questions again, answer the questions, and then check your answer. I just want to touch on two more things. Reversals. Reversals are something that cause great stress for students with dyslexia and for younger students who are not dyslexic. This is the method that I use to give my students a tool for them to figure it out for themselves. So make a fist with your left hand, thumbs up. Then make a fist with your right hand, thumbs up. Bring your fists together. Ask your students to spell the word bed. If you can't spell bed, please just teach it. Now spell the word bed. B-E-D. You match it to your hands. Now your student can match his hands to the letter and tell the difference. Eventually, they don't need to put up their hands, but still refer to the BED in their minds. I also mentioned learning times tables can be very difficult for students, not only for your students with dyslexia, but for the rest of your class too. But YouTube makes it really easy. If you do a YouTube search for any times tables, you will quickly find several versions with different rhythms. If you simply play it in your class, they will soon learn those tables and tell their parents to do the same at home. If it's learning made fun and easy. We've come to the end of my presentation. I'm so happy that I had this opportunity to reach so many teachers. I hope that you find at least some, if not all, of the information useful. All of the websites that provide free downloadable and printable material that I talked about will be sent to you in a Word document. Just simply click on the link and it will take you directly to the website. Do try to vary your method of teaching to include all of your students. You might be the one teacher that makes a difference in their lives. And remember to have fun. Please remember to get in touch with the Dyslexia Association if you need information about dyslexia, a remedial teacher, or information about our training courses or the use of the library. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Now I send you back to Catherine and our panel to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Gosh, a lot to take in. Wonderful. I just want to remind all the participants that we will be posting this webinar on YouTube. By the middle of next week, we should have it done. It doesn't seem to be that hard to do. So straight on to the questions. We have quite a lot. So Dr. Skerritt, first of all, will alternative testing be helpful for students with dyslexia, or will it be beneficial for them to participate in typical testing?
Well, definitely for students with dyslexia, there needs to be a specific type of assessment because you're looking for specific things, areas dealing with phonological awareness, verbal reasoning, verbal fluency. And not everything has to do with deficits. So for example, students with dyslexia tend to be strong in semantic fluency. You can think of words associated with particular concepts. But when it comes to verbal fluency, if you ask them, for example, if I give you letter C, give me all the words that start with that letter, and not dealing with sound, just a letter, they would have difficulties with that. Some assessment, we look at postural stability because there's some aspect of the brain with students with dyslexia that they tend to have challenges with postural stability. So we look for things like that. So you can't just use the regular reading assessment for students with reading challenges, and you might just miss the child, the dyslexic child, because those assessments may not look at some of those specific areas.
Thank you. I think also the person was asking about school exams. So, you know, what is your advice about that? Whether there should be different type of testing, or whether the child can actually sit school exams, end of term exams?
Well, I think that speaks more to the kinds of accommodations that needs to be done. The students would need to do the same exams, but they would need to have things like more time, and maybe place in a room where they're not distracted. Maybe some passages might need to be recorded so that they have the benefit of audio recorded access to text. Now, so those kinds of things may provide the support for that child. There are some things that a person with dyslexia will struggle with that may never be corrected, and the support systems gives them that level playing field to work with. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Yes, for me, it certainly did. I said this one is for you. How soon can some form of intervention be done, and where?
Thank you for the question, Catherine. Yes, intervention can start early. It can start at 5 years old as the child is in formal schooling. You can call the Dyslexia Association, and what we will do is put the parent can call the association. We will put the parent in contact with a teacher in their area, so intervention can happen there. We have trained teachers all over Trinidad and Tobago that can work with any of the children.
Catherine, if I can just add. So PEDIC also offers interventions, and we have at PEDIC reading specialists who have been trained by the Dyslexia Association and who will soon be receiving training from the Dyslexia Association. So we also provide intervention for students with general reading challenges and with dyslexia. But of course, the Dyslexia Association has been doing a wonderful job, and I encourage you to take advantage of that as well as our services.
So thank you, Dr. Scott, because I was going to also ask you to say a bit more about PEDIC and their role as far as dyslexic and students at risk for dyslexia are concerned.
So PEDIC offers a number of psychometric assessments. We have a number of clinical psychologists who work with us, and some reading specialists. We have some reading assessments that are specific to screening or diagnosing dyslexia. And we also have some more standardized reading assessments that allow us to take a look at a range of reading challenges. And when we would provide the assessment, and then meet back with the parents, provide some consultation, let them know what we found and some recommendations. But we also provide an educational plan for the child, and we provide intervention services, both face-to-face and now in the new mode of remote learning, we are offering our services remotely as well.
Thank you, and I believe it's very affordable.
Yes, so you know, the services outside can be very expensive, and we have purposely to ensure access and to level the playing field for the underserved and marginalized. We've ensured our costs are tremendously less. We even have a payment plan for those parents who may not be able to pay upfront for the services. They can even make a down payment, and then in order to get their final report, they would complete their payments then.
So wonderful, thank you. Hyacinthe, this one is for you. People are asking about what kind of accommodations children can get at SEA.
At SEA level, one of the first things the school has to do is have the child assess or call in, be in contact with student support services or any of those government services in education to get the accommodations for the child. So they will come in, the school has to apply for accommodations. The authorities or the social workers from the ministry would come in to the school and have a chat with the class teachers, the students, how they're performing and so. And then if their child is eligible for accommodations, then they will get things like, if it were SEA, they would get extra time. They would be placed in a room apart from the other kids. They will have a special invigilator. And basically the atmosphere is not as rushed. So they have more time to be able to think about what they want to do and think about their answers, you know, in a more relaxed atmosphere. But those are some of the accommodations. It must come through the Ministry of Education for the child to be eligible for accommodation.
Thank you. Also, I want to say that we have just only twice got a scribe for a child, but they actually, both of them had slight physical difficulties with writing. So one had some birth difficulty, and so his right hand was a bit compromised, and one child had mild cerebral palsy, and so the writing rate was slow. But so, you know, do ask for accommodations for your children, whether they're dyslexic or not. So, Dr. Skerritt, back to you. One of the teachers wants to know, is there a spectrum of dyslexia from mild to severe?
Yes, as with all human beings, all children, they're heterogeneous, they're different. So environmental factors can impact a child with dyslexia positively or negatively, and therefore make their challenge mild or severe. The nature of the neurological disorder is also going to affect that. So you would have some individuals who would you know, have a milder case, especially older children, because they have gone so long without getting the necessary training and the right kind of structured, explicit instruction that can help rewire that brain. They're going to struggle even more. So those environmental factors, those other things, what happens during pregnancy, all those things can make a difference.
That's interesting, because somebody asked whether taking drugs in pregnancy could cause dyslexia, and whether there's any medication to prevent dyslexia.
I'm not a medical doctor, but I know that pregnancy can be a factor resulting in what happens in pregnancy can be a factor resulting in dyslexia. I'm not sure about medication that could help to prevent dyslexia. I've not read anything, but I will be glad to look into it and provide some feedback later on.
I think if there was medication, we would all have heard about it by now. Good questions, Bill. All right, I have one for Hyacinth. This person is asking, do dyslexic students need to be in a different classroom setting? Can they cope in a regular classroom?
Okay, so with intervention, a child can cope in a regular classroom. So the child is getting remedial help. He can cope in a regular classroom, but he might also be a little older than the rest of his class, because you might have found that he had to repeat at some point where they first found out that, you know, he was underperforming. There might have been a repeat there to get his learning up to level for him to move on. But yes, he definitely, with right intervention and the program that we do at the Dyslexia Association, he can cope in a regular classroom.
Sorry, I was reading more questions. We're not going to get around to answering all the questions. I have to say there are a lot. And so I'd like to tell people that if you haven't got an answer, please email us with your question. We'll be happy to write you personally or to chat to you to answer your questions. So the next question I have for Dr. Skerritt. Oof, I've lost that. This is something I know you've been fighting for, and we've been fighting for, Dr. Skerritt. So maybe you'd like to weigh in. One teacher is asking, why is this training not mandatory?
I've been asking that since I did training so many years ago. And I know that UIS is hopefully very soon, maybe next year or so, we're trying to reoffer our masters in reading education, and definitely the training that the Dyslexia Association has been doing is going to be featured in one of our courses, and other courses, for example, visualizing and verbalizing, and some of the other courses you've done in the past, maybe they're under new names now, but those important aspects of working with students with dyslexia are going to be featured in our master's program. But I think that all teachers need to have this information. And because of our local situation where our children are growing up in homes where they speak our beautiful Creole, and then they come to have to read and write in this English with this very deep orthography that is so challenging, so unpredictable, so inconsistent. Teachers need to come with a measure of understanding of linguistics and how language works, so you can really provide the kind of quality instruction for students, especially with dyslexia, who are struggling with a language problem, with phonological awareness issues. So I think the Ministry of Education would do well to ensure all their teachers have that requisite training, and all teacher education programs, especially for reading teachers, that they come armed with that training as well.
Sorry, my button didn't work. Fighting the good fight. Keep working. Hyacinth, someone wanted to know, is social awkwardness a part of dyslexia?
Dyslexia is really a language-based learning difficulty. So anything to do with language, reading, writing, spelling, comprehension, all those areas that are language-based are associated with dyslexia. So sometimes if you get a report from a psychologist, it might tell you this child has a language-based learning difficulty. It's dyslexia they're referring to. Social awkwardness is something else where maybe the child never learned how to socialize or so, but it doesn't have anything to do with dyslexia.
I don't know if I could just add a comment to that. So I agree with Hyacinth. But of course, because language is used so much to socialize, for example, reading and writing, oftentimes, if a child has trouble coming up with words, their verbal fluency, and find the right word to say, that could have an impact on your social interactions and lead to social awkwardness. But I completely agree with Hyacinth's explanation.
There was a related question to that, actually. One teacher was asking about a child whose reading, writing, spelling have all been remediated very nicely, doing very well in school, but oral fluency is really, just really difficult, have a lot of difficulty getting his words out. So maybe Dr. Skerritt, you could chat about that as well.
I was going to defer that question to Hyacinth.
Hyacinth?
I was going to defer it to him as well.
Well, can I weigh in? Because I had a long time to think about this, because it came early on the Q&A. So I've been thinking about this, and I'm thinking that it is a part of dyslexia. Sometimes that word finding is a part of dyslexia. And that maybe the best thing to do would be to speak to speech therapists. We have a list of speech therapists in the office. They would know best what kind of intervention could be done for oral fluency. That would be the best thing to do.
Just to add to that, one of the things that helps children is to develop something called word consciousness. That passion for learning words, and practical things need to be done Of course, exposure to oral language, a lot of elaborate discourse, which we're not too used to in Trinidad and Tobago. In our Caribbean cultures, we tend to use this restricted code. There's not much elaborate discourse going on in conversations between parents, conversations about text. And if we can get students word hunts, word searches, our use of language, letting children see our love of language, then that is going to help them with that exposure, that use, closing the gap between their receptive vocabulary and the expressive vocabularies to develop that fluency. And of course, if it's with regard to reading fluency, there are lots of things, a lot of read alouds, and ensuring that when we read aloud to children, we model that fluency for them, that prosody, reading in a very conversational way, in modeling our pitch, pace, and power, tone, and get children to fall in love with reading, and they get to see that when they read, if they can read in that conversational manner, then those are some things that need to be done to address both the verbal fluency and the reading fluency that students with dyslexia struggle with.
Yes, I remember this Dutch educational psychologist who said, Catherine, bathe your children in language, not bathe. Bathe your children in language. And it's true, we bathe our children in language. They will be such an advantage for school, oral discourse, social interaction. All of this is going to help our children. And just as reading to them, talking to them, engaging them in language. So I do have one more question for you, Dr. Skerritt. This teacher says, without the proper support to understand and support dyslexic children to move forward, how can labeling a child affect the child?
Yeah, for a long time we've been concerned about labeling. In fact, it's all the talk about whether we should call somebody dyslexic, so people first language. We deal with that in special needs education all the time. And really, there are many dyslexic people who are very proud to be called dyslexic, because you have deaf people who are proud to be called deaf. And if you keep hiding the fact that someone is dyslexic, that's when the child becomes underserved. And sometimes it's used as an excuse for a teacher to not attend to the needs of that child, and then the child goes through the system and doesn't succeed. Sometimes very brilliant children. So identifying a child as dyslexic, making sure the child understands is not you. As Emma says, the blame lies in the language, not you. And then giving the child all the support that they need is critical. So I think we should worry less about labels and focus on addressing the needs of our children.
Thank you. I remember Holly Batodia saying, I always thought I was stupid. I'm so glad to find out I'm dyslexic. Isn't that wonderful? So much for labels. Well, we've come to the end of the webinar. I know there are one or two questions we haven't answered, but I've tried to put questions of the same subject together. So you might not have heard your exact words, but hopefully we've covered the nut of the question. Please email us with your questions. We're very happy to respond to you and help you. That's what we're there for. And thank you to everyone who came on. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Lisa for all the background chat, and especially thank you to Emma for preparing this wonderful presentation. It was lovely. I love your slides, Emma. They're so clear. Thank you so much. And bye-bye, everyone. Goodbye.